what I should really do is start at the beginning, with the heat. It has been the hottest North Texas summer I can ever remember. It's not like desert weather, because in the desert it gets hot as hell during the day, and at night it turns cold. Not here. The black clay soil and the limestone soak up the brutal heat of the sun in the day. The heat of the day not only comes from the sky, but also radiates up from the ground and around your feet. The night brings little to no relief because the ground has stored the heat up all day like some huge battery. The temperature hardly seems to drop at all. Sometimes the summers are so hot that no dew is on the grass in the mornings. The rolling hills turn to sepia because all the grass dies. Day after day, the temperature soars above 100 degrees. Trees and fields are motionless under the relentless sun, and the cicadas drone on all day long. The sky is pale blue, dominated by a gray haze which is caused by what little moisture remains. The clouds no longer resemble fluffy cotton sculptures, but look more like they were hastily painted with coarse brushstrokes and blurred edges as the sun quickly beats them into submission and they become part of the haze. This particular summer, like I said before, has been the worst by far. No rain. They say we're setting records this year. The longest drought. The most consecutive days above 100 degrees. Heat-related deaths, especially among the elderly, are reaching high counts. Being outside or without air conditioning during the day is pure misery. The wind barely moves the hot air. People flock to the lakes and swimming pools looking for relief. It seems like nothing moves or breathes, and it feels like it will never end. My friends and I have tried to make the best of it. We get together at night to hang out, and we suffer at work from a lack of sleep and constant sweating. We try to entertain and distract each other. We occupy our minds by talking about what to do and where to meet. I suppose it helps that we're young. It helps us to endure. It helps us to fool ourselves into believing that things will always be the same. We love our youth. And because of this, we love life. And we love each other. Can you say what you would have done? Would you have pulled the trigger like I did? Would you have been able to stop what happened? I can't speak for you or anyone else. I can only speak for myself. When I woke up that morning, lying in the cold, wet mud, it was already in the past. It was all over with. The 12-gauge pump shotgun was lying within reach, clotted with mud. I can deal with what I did, but it's harder to deal with what I couldn't do. I couldn't save any of them. I couldn't even save myself. Some people are calling me a monster after what happened. They can call me what they want to call me. They're probably right anyway. I won't judge anyone for seeing me that way, because it's probably for the best. Still, I know what happened in that valley and underneath that old wooden bridge. It seems I am the only one left who really does know. This whole thing started when I pulled into the driveway of Tammy's house that evening. It was a white-sided little 2-bedroom house with dark green fake shutters on either side of the front picture window. Tammy came bouncing down the stairs of the covered porch and settled in beside me in my old Ford pickup truck. She was wearing cut-off blue jeans and leather sandals. Her light blue t-shirt hung loosely on her shoulders, revealing the black bikini top underneath. Her long, jet black hair caught the evening sunlight and gleamed with a blue hue. She locked my eyes into hers with a wicked, beautiful smile and held up the freshly rolled joint. "Got a light?" she giggled. "This is some sweet bud." Not nearly as sweet as you, I thought. I produced a lighter from my pocket and she fired up. My truck was soon filled with the pungent bluish smoke of some high-quality marijuana. We hit and passed the reefer with practiced skill as I drove toward the outskirts of town. We were due to meet our friends at one of our popular party places, an old country cemetery. Our schedule was usually flexible concerning our parties. Sometime after sundown, several carloads of 20-something potheads would end up spending the night hours in some lonely spot where we could get high and make each other laugh without having to worry about intruders. Carefree days and nights like those seem so far away, even though they're not that long ago at all. Time stands still for me now. I feel really, really old somehow. But I digress. The sun was setting, and the last lights of town flashed across our faces as I drove outside the city limits. Something strange happened to me then. I looked sideways at Tammy's face and caught a glimpse of her silhouette in a flash of harsh light. I guess she had just taken a large hit of weed and was head rushing. Her face was completely relaxed, and for an instant, I saw a vision of her as she lay in an open casket at her funeral, as beautiful in death as she was in life. I shook the image off immediately and blamed it on the cloudiness of my marijuana-shrouded mind. I was actually still suffering from mild shock due to the simple fact that this girl had chosen to be with me for some weeks now. I felt intoxicated just to be with her, and no fleeting mental hiccup was going to be allowed to interfere with the casual fun we were having. She passed me the joint, and I inhaled its smoke deeply. The moon was full that night, and it covered the country roads with a pale silver light. Tammy and I didn't speak much as I drove through the familiar twists and turns. We were comfortable with each other, even in silence. Trees crowded both sides of the road as we neared the cemetery. One last turn, and we passed through the open gate. The cattle guard rattled under my wheels as I drove to the far back corner near an old creek and killed the engine. The silence of the night closed in around us as the clicking sounds of my old truck cooling down died away. I dug my stash of weed out from my underwear between my legs and started rolling the joints. Tammy helped until we rolled 4. Then she decided to spend a little time kissing my face. In no time at all, I was drunk with the ecstasy of her full pouty lips and sweet breath, and the nearness of her lithe frame. I could have simply forgotten where I was and floated in euphoria without the slightest remorse, but a pair of headlights turning into the cemetery entrance brought me around quickly. I recognized the front end of my best friend Charles's 1970 Ranchero right away. One more vehicle, a blue Chevy Nova, pulled in directly behind Charles. Tammy and I jumped out of my truck to greet them as they rolled up and killed their engines. The dust of summer settled around us. "Hey, boy," Charles spouted with the sort of mock aggression that characterized the somewhat unique sense of humor he and I shared as lifelong best friends. Cutting each other down and pretending to be occasionally on the verge of fighting always served to amuse us, and sometimes, but not always, those around us. He climbed out of his Ranchero, and from the passenger side came his on-again, off-again girlfriend, whose name was Lorraine. Charles was built a lot like me, only slightly smaller. He was thin but well-fed. No cut muscles from working out, but a wiry strength that showed in the way he stood and carried himself. His hair, however, was nothing like my straight, stringy blonde hair. His was a mass of tangled red locks with a mind of their own. He didn't seem to have much control over them. His face floated within them, eyes always smiling. He was the class clown, the joker, always looking for fun. His girl Lorraine was much more sedate. She was a small woman who didn't smile much, but she was always pleasant to be around. She stood with her shoulders just slightly forward and walked with a fluid grace. Her natural blonde hair fell on her shoulders with gradual curves. She had green eyes. Out of the Nova tumbled two more from our tight little circle of friends. They were brothers, Mick and Rodney. Once everyone had greeted one another, the joints began to blaze. Glowing cherries floated from hand to hand in the muggy darkness. Cold sodas were distributed by Charles, and we all settled down, open tailgates and warm hoods to enjoy the communion of each other's company. Conversations about nothing and everything, about the stars in the sky and mysteries of the night, about the songs of birds and the screams of electric guitars, about times past and anything to make each other laugh. All these things and more we shared freely as our thoughts ebbed and flowed. To us, it seemed we were in harmony with the night and everything in it. Finally, the conversation faded to a gentle lull. The faint music of crickets in the grass and frogs in the creek, and soft, mournful calls from little screech owls in the distance covered us like a blanket. We quieted down to listen. Rodney's voice broke the spell. "You think they can find us out here?" "I don't know," answered his brother. "Do what?" I asked. "We invited a couple of people we met today to come out and get high with us," said Rodney. His tight curly hair was practically a brown afro, and his red cheeks caught the moonlight. He grinned a lot and squinted every time he took a hit of weed. His brother let his long black hair hang in his face and stayed in Rodney's shadow most of the time. Rodney told us all how he and Mike met a dude and a chick at the Renaissance Fair just outside of town earlier that day. The fair folk usually had good weed for sale, and we were well acquainted with several groups of year-round residents there. Mike and Rodney had gone to see Harry and Rainbow, a married couple who owned and operated a concessions building called the Hog's Head Pub. They lived in the back of the building and sold weed to supplement their income while their fair was closed. When the brothers got there, another couple was hanging out and drinking wine and smoking weed, John and Cecilia. "You think they'll find us?" I asked. "Did you give them some decent directions?" We were a tight circle of friends, but always willing to have others join us if they seemed cool enough. "Sure, I gave them good directions," Rodney insisted. "They should be able to find us out here no problem. I guess we'll have to wait and see, though." As if on cue, the sound of a vehicle was heard down the road. Tires crunched gravel, and squeaks came from some old worn-out suspension. The trees began to glow from the glare of the headlights. Brakes squealed in a high-pitched whine as the car neared the entrance to the cemetery. When it turned in and I caught sight of the car's front end, I suddenly had to swallow a lump that jumped into my throat. It's hard to explain what happened to me then, because never before in my life had I been so affected by the simple sight of headlights on a car. An acute sense of dread fell on me like a cloud of noxious fumes. Maybe it was something about the shape of the hue of the light, but I got the feeling they were looking at me. There was some insidious intent hiding behind them. It was as if I was looking into the face of a serial killer while he stalked a victim. The sensation of brooding malice was so strong that it bruised my thoughts. I must have winced. I felt Tammy's hand fall softly on my shoulder, and she drew me tightly against her. She asked if everything was okay, and I tried to brush it off as casually as I could. I told her it was nothing, even though I felt like I had been sucker punched in the gut. I tried to ignore it and act like nothing had happened. After all, I told myself, nothing really had happened. It was just a ridiculous little fright, probably brought on by the weed. The car rolled to a stop in front of us. It was a two-door Chevy sedan that had been new sometime back in the late 1960s. The wear and tear of countless miles showed all over it. In several spots, the metal body had rusted completely through. The front grille seemed to be tied in place by wire. Deep cracks crisscrossed the windshield. The paint had faded to powder blue. The long doors creaked loudly and popped as they were opened. A man climbed from behind the steering wheel, and a woman from the passenger side. The sinister headlights remained lit as the two introduced themselves as John and Cecilia. John was tall and lanky, with long brown hair tied in a curly bunch behind his long neck. He wore a sleeveless blue jean jacket with no shirt underneath, baggy jeans, and leather Jesus sandals. He didn't seem to be in the habit of bathing very often. He had a goatee that enhanced the goatish look of his face. Cecilia was a small woman. She had thick curly hair growing out from her head like black flames. The top she was wearing was tie-dyed, and it was hard to tell whether it was a shirt or a blouse or some kind of half dress. Her tight jeans fit very nicely over the shapely curves of her hips. Her dark eyes shone beneath slanted, well-defined eyebrows. After all the introductions had been exchanged, more weed was fired up. John leaned into the car to kill the lights and then produced a rather handsome pipe from his pocket and passed it around. Cecilia brought out half-pint-sized steel flask and soon made its way around to me. I took a quick sniff and a small sip. It seemed to be some kind of liquor, but I really wasn't sure. I immediately wished I hadn't taken a sip, however, because it burned all the way down my throat and sent a hot rush through my entire body. That one little sip changed the entire night for me. My perception was altered, like I had been dunked underwater. The others' voices rang inside my head, and the dim silver light of the night became murky. I vaguely remember asking what was in the flask, but getting no response. The next time it was offered to me, I turned it down. The offer was repeated rather insistently, but I refused again. I felt as if I needed to regain my balance somehow. I wasn't really alarmed. I was accustomed to this sort of thing happening from time to time, becoming slightly stupefied by the effects of whatever illicit substance I might be trying for the first time, or one that I might not be used to. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence for me. Usually I could manage to ride it out and continue to party until I felt more stable. I took a long drink of soda, and that helped a bit. I tried to mingle my thoughts back into the collective of the group. Whatever was in the little flask didn't seem to have affected anyone else like it had me. Although thinking back, I'm not certain I saw anyone else take a sip. I'm sure someone must have, but even so, everyone's conversation continued to flow as before without any obvious difference except, was it beginning to slow down slightly? Was there perhaps some dark tinge creeping its way into the tone of voices and the sound of laughter? Or was it just me feeling uncomfortable because of the sip from the flask? I chastised myself for being silly and forced myself to relax against the warmth of Tammy's body. She felt as soft as the night breeze on my face. I focused on listening more than speaking, and it seemed to help.